All right, raise your hand if you went out and got some pencils. It's amazing. I've bought hundreds of them over the years, and you can still easily end up in a position where you're like, where's a blue pencil? So if this resonates with you, then just start colouring in. As you do your daily readings, colour in stuff that jumps out at you, and before you know it, your Bibles will be full. And I actually said Eli was trying to wiggle his way out of some of this stuff last Sunday, and I had his Bible yesterday, and every page I opened up had something coloured in. I was like, wow, I had no idea you had this much stuff in here. So I was impressed with him for that. These page inserts, we mentioned them last week. So like I said, you can pick these up from Christadelphian Library. We have one in Detroit and one out in California. And the coloured inserts are really neat. They have them for a lot of different subjects. You've got, so this one obviously, Daniel 2:44, and then there's one later on for the beasts in Daniel. There's Revelation ones, there's all sorts of different ones, and they are nice and colourful and really jump out. There's a really good one for the kings of Israel that show you with a timeline when they were and who they were contemporary with. And so anytime you can have something like that, it can really help sort of bring the subject to life. And then, like I said, I went and made a bunch of them myself for the different doctrines out there. And these come in really handy if you have your neighbour over and you're talking about the scriptures and they're hung up on the devil. If you have an insert that's all about the topic of the devil, it'll have all the, mine have all the quotes sort of that they might use, and then I can turn those quotes up and I have it marked in there what it actually means. So if you look at the soul one here, it says the soul in the Bible means primarily breathing creature, a body capable of life, man or beast. The term is also used to various attributes and aspects of the body, e.g. life, mind, lust, etc. And then it goes on to say that the soul that is in man is the same as the soul that is in a beast, and I think that's in Ecclesiastes. But it's neat to have all of that information just packed on one page. And it really is a fantastic tool, and I've even made them up or begun to make them up for other religions too. So I have one for the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses. And so those poor people, if they ever come to my door, they just, it's a bit of an uphill battle for them. So anyway, that comes in really handy, because sometimes it is hard at a moment's notice to think, where is the quote, that talks about this or in relation to a particular subject. Of course, you've got to make it easy to find these things because they're scattered all through the Bible. And I've got working on an index there. So that just helps me find those at a moment's notice. I put this one in because somebody brought up last week, what do you do if you've got a bunch of different subjects sort of popping out in the one verse? So this is a great one, right, in Ephesians 2:12. That at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. And that's a really great quote, I think, when we're talking to other people, because it really highlights just how desperate the situation is for humanity. If you do nothing, if you just go about your life, God says, you can do whatever you want, but you have no hope. And you're without God in the world. And so different colours there highlighting the different aspects of that verse. And lots of verses are like that, right? Moving into the 21st century, one of the things that really intimidated me as a new Christadelphian when I was a teenager was these concordances. This big old book up on the shelf, and you plunk it down and the whole house would rattle. They were so big and so heavy, and you had to flick through the pages and find the number, and then you had to flick to the other end of the book to find the meaning. And I mean, they're a great tool, and you think about Brother Thomas 170 years ago, having every time he looked up a word had to go through that. Well, for us, obviously very simple. The one that I use is Blue Letter Bible, and you guys might have a different one, but really, really great tool to use. And so at a moment, you can just type it in and it gives you all the information that you need. And so that becomes a really great tool in Bible study and Bible marking as well. Anybody use anything other than Blue Letter Bible? Bible Hub, yeah. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, fantastic tools. I mean, we have, yeah, Jason? Yeah. Yeah. Anybody that didn't hear that, Brother Phil Capusta has developed his own app. What a champion, right? And it's called InWord. InWord, correct, yeah. And has all sorts of tools on there, yeah. So that's a great one as well. I should have used that one, Jason, thanks. Bible chains come in really handy, particularly if you're dealing with somebody or even just for your own study on a subject. And what I do with these is you start from, if you see on page 2 there, devil and devils, the chain begins in Leviticus 17:7. And so if I was to turn that up, it says, and they shall no more offer their sacrifices unto devils, after whom they have gone a-whoring. This shall be a statute forever unto them throughout all their generations. And so this is used in relation to their idols, right? They're sacrificing unto their idols. There's another one, when you look up these words, where the translators might use devils the majority of the time, but then there'll be a passage that it doesn't fit. And one example is in the New Testament, where the women were being slanderers, and so it says, rather than using Satan, they use slanderer correctly in that passage. And so when you look up the word, it can become obvious quite quickly what the true meaning is. Here's my devil insert, the crazy picture of the popular devil there. So these chains become really handy, right? So you go to the first place where the word occurs, and that's where I put the insert, and then the chain begins. So then you'll explain what that passage means, and then you'll move on to the next one and write in the margin what it means, and you can go through all the different, throughout the scripture where that word occurs, showing what it actually means. Does that make sense? Yeah. I have a lot of pictures in my Bible because I kind of think in pictures. The one there in Psalm 84, I love the imagery of that, where David says, I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of the Lord than anything else. And so there's a little picture of David in the temple in the future. Jonathan and his armor bearer going through the garrison of the Philistines up there. The other one is the Proverbs 31 woman, and Ecclesiastes next. So Ecclesiastes talks a lot about life being like a vapor. And over there on the other page, that verse in Ecclesiastes says that there's no difference between a man and a beast. They all die the same way, and they all go to the same end. In other words, return to dust. So these pictures, if I can't remember exactly where that is in Ecclesiastes, but I know that I've got a picture there, I can just flip through Ecclesiastes quickly, and there's the picture and there's the verse because it's highlighted. So it's just it just speeds things up for me if I was wanting to show that to somebody. Sometimes a picture says 1,000 words. So in Leviticus 14, it's talking about the unclean house and leprosy being in a house. And that becomes a parallel in AD 70 or at the time of Christ, where Christ is going into the temple to observe things. I remember he overthrows the tables of the money changers and stuff. And he does that on 2 occasions, at the beginning and at the end of his ministry. And he determines that the house is unclean. And in Leviticus, it tells us that you have to burn the house and destroy it and pull it down if it's determined after all the process to be unclean. And of course, that's what happened to the temple in AD 70. And so I've got the picture there where Jesus is looking through the binoculars at the temple, and he just sees snakes cruising around. So it's fit for destruction. The picture there is Romans 8, where it's telling us that we have sin in the flesh. And so I've got a picture of myself with a snake underneath just to prove the point. And of course, there's the temple being destroyed in Mark 11. So these pictures just really sort of drive home the point that's being made. Cyrus the Great. And this becomes a bit of a study where Cyrus is a type of Christ. And then you can have some fun with these. I give you permission. Whatever it takes to drive home the point. So there's Homer Simpson, right? You think, how did Homer make it into the Bible? But it says there in verse 24, a slothful man hides his hand in his bosom and will not so much as bring it to his mouth again. And so, driving home the point of slothfulness. Donald, what is that? Uncle Scrooge there, the dangers of riches. And then Isaiah 54, in verse 17 there says, no weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper. And so I used to be a bit of a Superman fan. Superman, of course, has his kryptonite, but in the kingdom age, when we're given immortality, no weapon that is formed will prosper against us. I had a friend back when I was a teenager that gave a bit of a meditation talk on faith and works. And I always thought the faith and works argument was a stupid one. Obviously, you need both of them. And so he drove that point home by bringing a toy truck out during his exhortation and said, what's the point of the prime mover if you don't have the trailer? And what's the point of the trailer if you don't have the prime mover? And so they have to go together, and that's faith and works. And I thought, great. And I've never forgot that. So that went in as a picture. Have a bit of fun with some of this stuff. And I probably have maybe 400 or 500 pictures in here. And if anybody is doing a slideshow and you need a picture for something, if you want, ask me and I may have something that you can use if you don't have any pictures for that topic. Timelines come in really handy. The kings of Israel and Judah can be really confusing. I've made this insert up for the timeline there, and you'll see immediately that the kings of Israel on the left there never ever had a good king, because all their kings are in red there. So they never ever had a good king. On the right, we did have some good kings in Judah, Some of them were good some of the time and bad some of the time. Down here on the bottom left, I try to do this for each time we get a new king, and it really helps me see what's going on. So straight away we know that the time of Solomon ended around 930 BC, and Solomon there started out very good, so he's blue and sort of fades into red, right, because he messed it up in the end. Jeroboam and Rehoboam, bad. We get to Asa, he's a good guy. And so immediately I can open the page up and know, okay, we're talking about a good guy or a bad guy today, and so on. Blank slide. This is a timeline that I found for the New Testament, and it puts, and obviously we could argue over some of these, but basically puts everything into a timeline for the Gospels, right, as Christ goes through. So it's the top one there says, John the Baptist sends messengers to Jesus, and you'll find that in Matthew 11, verse 2 through 6, and Luke 7, 3 through whatever it says there. And I can turn that up and see where things fit in the timeline. And that can come in really handy. A good one that jumps out to me is when Peter gives his great confession. That's about 6 months prior to the crucifixion. Jesus says that he set his face to go towards Jerusalem at that time. And so from that time forward, all that Christ was focusing on, or the prime drive of his focus was to get the mission completed, which was to die on the cross. So anyway, that comes in really handy. If you're doing a study on any particular topic there, let's go up and pick one. So the Transfiguration, for example, I know that it's in 3 of the Gospels and where to find them. And then when I open up that Gospel, and it's, let's say I open up the Matthew one, and it starts, if I can zoom in, Transfiguration, Matthew 17, I think it is. Next to Matthew 17, where the Transfiguration is, I'll write in what the other 2 Gospels where it talks about the Transfiguration are. Make sense? Just so that, because often one Gospel will have slightly different info than another one. Sometimes when I'm doing studies, I'll dedicate some pages in the back of the Bible. When I got this rebound, I had a bunch of extra pages put in. And so, because you run out of these pretty quick, right? So any big study I do, I can put back there, and then I've got it forever in the back. That one's on the Sabbath, and if ever I need to know anything about the Sabbath, I can just turn back there and do that. Are any of you familiar with the Bible Project on YouTube? Yeah. So they teach their stuff through pictures and cartoons, really. And so I bought their big book, and they have a summary of every book of the Bible done in comics. And it's a bit of a massive undertaking, but I'm slowly trying to go through and replicate that in my Bible. Some things, because they're Christians, sometimes they miss the point on certain things, but I can go in there and tweak it how I want it. But that's just a good way and for a couple of years ago, when we would do the daily readings, if we started a new book of the Bible, I would sit down with the family and we would watch the Bible Project summary on that book before we started the book, just so that you're going into it having an idea of what this book's all about. Okay? I wrote the commandments of Christ in the back, and I was supposed to read them every year, but I've not been faithful to that, but it's back there if ever I need it. And I've also got the statement of faith in there as well, handwritten out. Just so it's, the point being is that, just like the silly example of that rifle having everything you needed attached to it, everything I need is sort of in this one book. Daily readings. Have you all got for those of you that do the Robert Roberts reading plan, you've got the little booklet that you open up sometimes to, now it's on our phones, right? We've got the daily reading app and it's on our phone. But prior to those apps, I went through and wrote at the beginning of every chapter when you read it. So December 8th and June 8th, we read that chapter, whatever that is. And I have that for every chapter. So I could just open it up and find it. And of course, this Bible has the little tag things, so that I just put those in for the daily readings and it makes it easy. But if ever there's any confusion, that works out pretty good. So that's the last slide I've got. Comments? Has that inspired anybody to colour in your Bibles or have a bit of fun with it? Maybe some extra tools that you hadn't thought of? With these wide margin Bibles, and it's pretty hard to teach an old dog new tricks, but if pretty much the only place you can find these days are at Christadelphian Library. I was able to get my kids a copy of this each, and then somebody had asked last week, could they get a large print, wide margin, New King James or ESV or something. It does actually get really tricky to get all of those things that you want. Most Bibles nowadays, if you go to a Christian bookstore, don't have the wide margins, so it's a bit of a rare thing. And of course they're expensive because of that, but it's kind of been the Christadelphian standard, at least in Australia, for many years.
What brand of colored pencil do you use? What do you have found that works well?
I just buy the Crayola ones from Walmart. They do fade a little bit over the decades, but you can just go back and go over them again. I definitely get those Micron pens, though, just because you can write really small, and I probably should have had a slide for just how small you can write, and I'll have to get a magnifying glass or something when I get older, but for some of this stuff, because you can write really, really small. But the other good thing is that they don't eat your page away. So it's hard to see there, but I did a study in Hebrews once, and the writing is like really, really small, like half as small again as the words. And you can do that with those pens because they're just really on point. Going forward, remember I couldn't think of the third option last week? I said we could do Messiah, we could do difficult passages, and I couldn't remember the third one. The third one was events leading up to the return of Christ and perhaps beyond. So that would be the third one. Stu's going to jump in here soon and do geography, right? The mountains of Israel. Okay. And when did you want to start on that? May. Okay. All right. Yeah, no, that's totally fine. So with very short notice, just raise your hands again. The three options, so I'll start this next week. We've got Messiah, difficult passages, or events around the return of Christ. Yeah, so that would be a study of sort of why mankind needs a Messiah, how his atoning work plays out and his future role in the kingdom age. So hands up for Messiah. Okay. Difficult passages. Okay. And events around the return of Christ. Okay, so that's a popular one. All right, well, let's plan that. And my personal view of events leading up to the return of Christ and going forward are basically exactly in line with Brother Thomas in Elpis Israel. I know there's some other views out there, and that's totally fine. So we'll just go through and chat about these things. But that's what I'll plan to do. And then at some point, Stuart will jump in and we'll have his class. That's it. That's time, isn't it, Walter? 3 more minutes. Let's talk about current events for 3 minutes. So we've already settled into a world in which Iran is being bombed on a daily basis. Sounds like the Houthis are at Israel again. Israel's been fully on the offensive for months now and seems to be bombing their enemies into oblivion. What are your thoughts on all of this? We're going to see perhaps the fulfillment of the peace and safety of Israel come out of this, or you got other ideas? Russia's been quiet. Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting yesterday, this No King's Day is actually around the world now. It's like the world's setting themselves up to reject Jesus.
Yeah.
Who's going to come back to proclaim himself king.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't want to be told what to do or have somebody make decisions on their behalf, do they? I thought it was funny that the English were doing it. It's like, you guys have a king. What are you talking about? Randy?
I think it was Weekly Worldwide. The quote of the verse said, "Let the weak say, I am strong." And that's what we're seeing Iran doing.
Yeah.
They're not a strong nation, but they got strength.
It was also reported that the Secretary of War, which is Pete Hegseth, and J.D. Vance, Vice President, both believe in Armageddon and the idea of a third temple in Israel. So they're not upset in the sense of where this is all going. They take a more traditional Christian viewpoint about, I don't know how far they go with Messiah and all the other, but they definitely both agree with the idea of a third temple in Jerusalem.
Yeah. And remember when this whole thing kicked off on October 7th, I gave a talk on it, I should know off the top of my head, but I don't. The name that Hamas gave that operation was, it was to do with the Temple Mount, and they were worried that the Jews were going to sacrifice a red heifer and knock down the Dome of the Rock and begin to build that third temple. And so that was kind of the name that they gave for October 7 operation. But yeah, it's been amazing to me to see these missiles hitting Israel and hitting Jerusalem, because Jerusalem's sort of always been off limits, I felt, because just in case they accidentally hit that Dome of the Rock. And I think there was some fell in the old city, so getting quite close to it.
Correct. Operation Al-Aqsa Flood.
That's it, yeah.
Which I think translates Sikmat Torah Massacre. Yeah.
But the Al-Aqsa, that's their name for the Dome of the Rock, isn't it?
Okay.
The mosque next door, yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and it's, even though the Jews got Jerusalem in 67, it's still I've not been there. Has anyone been to Israel? it's very difficult to get up on the Temple Mount, right? Like you can walk around the old city and stuff, but to get up there and walk around the Dome of the Rock is, unless you're a Muslim, is very difficult. You went in there? That was just the other day. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
Freely walk around the outside. I didn't want to pay to go in.
Yeah.
But you could also walk around the wall of Jerusalem,
Right.
around it, and look down on it. It's pretty cool. I got pictures.
Yeah. It's going to be such an amazing contrast when it goes from being this center of turmoil in the world to being the most peaceful, beautiful, tranquil place on the whole planet.
Just want to pass this on to you from Sister Fonda,
Okay.
who for many years was an art teacher,
Yeah.
taught my kids. She says that Prismacolor pencils are the best pigment pens you can get, and Linda and him will tell you that's true.
Say that for us again.
Prisma.
Prisma.
Prisma color pencil.
Oh, look, Brandy's got some down the back there.
And there they are. They are the best.
Where do you get those? Yeah, Michael's.
Online. I'm like,